Ethan Carter was a man who seemed to have it all. At just 34, he had built an empire of luxury brands, lived in a sprawling mansion in Beverly Hills, and owned a fleet of high-end cars that made headlines in business magazines. But behind the facade of success lay a man consumed by his work, with little time for personal connections. The one exception was Max, his loyal German shepherd. Max wasn't just a pet, he was Ethan's silent confidant, a companion who had been by his side for the past 6 years. Ethan had adopted Max from a shelter, where the dog had been left after a severe accident. From the moment their eyes met, Ethan felt a connection he couldn't explain. Max quickly adapted to his new life, offering Ethan the kind of companionship his wealth couldn't buy. Despite his chaotic schedule, Ethan always made time for Max. Morning walks and quiet evenings at home were their rituals, moments that grounded Ethan in an otherwise tumultuous life. Max's keen intuition and unwavering loyalty often felt like a constant reminder to Ethan of the value of trust and loyalty, qualities he rarely found in people around him. Ethan's mornings were a blend of efficiency and luxury. His alarm clock, synchronized with the automatic curtains, woke him at precisely 6 a.m. to reveal the golden Californian sunrise. By 6:30, he was dressed in a tailored suit, a symbol of his power and precision. His assistant had already texted him the day's schedule, a high-stakes meeting with investors that could open doors to an international expansion of his brand. Max was always part of this routine. As Ethan sipped his coffee, Max sat at his feet, his alert eyes following every movement. Ethan often absent-mindedly stroked Max's head, finding a rare moment of calm in the chaos of his ambitions. It was their silent pact. Max would sit quietly, a grounding presence, while Ethan mentally prepared for another day of relentless pursuit. By 7:15, Ethan was ready to leave. His driver was on standby, and the sleek black luxury car glistened in the driveway. As Ethan opened the door, Max suddenly perked up, his ears twitching. Ethan didn't notice. To him, it was just another ordinary day, and the thought that anything could disrupt his meticulously planned life never crossed his mind. Max, however, seemed to sense something was different. Ethan approached his car, focused on the day ahead, oblivious to Max's growing agitation. The German shepherd had risen from his spot near the door, his ears erect and his body tense. As Ethan reached for the handle, Max darted forward with a sudden burst of energy, grabbing the sleeve of Ethan's tailored suit in his teeth. "Max, what are you doing?" Ethan exclaimed, startled and irritated. He tried to pull his arm away, but Max held firm, his growl low and insistent. Ethan had never seen Max act this way. The dog was typically calm and composed, a steady presence amidst Ethan's fast-paced life. But now Max was acting completely out of character, tugging at Ethan's sleeve with a desperation that was impossible to ignore. "Max, stop it!" Ethan snapped, his frustration growing. He tried to push Max aside gently, but the dog wouldn't relent. Instead, Max planted his paws firmly on the ground, refusing to let Ethan take another step toward the car. Ethan froze for a moment, locking eyes with Max. There was no playfulness, no usual loyalty. It was sheer urgency, almost fear, that radiated from the dog's intense gaze. "What's wrong, boy?" Ethan muttered, his irritation giving way to concern. He glanced around, half expecting to see something obvious that might have spooked Max, but the driveway was empty, save for his car gleaming under the morning sun. Max's sharp barks interrupted his thoughts, and Ethan felt a strange knot of unease forming in his chest. Finally, Ethan decided to humor Max. "Fine, you win," he said with a sigh, stepping back from the car. He crouched down to calm Max, running a hand over the dog's tense shoulders. As his fingers brushed Max's fur, his gaze shifted down. Beneath the car, something metallic caught his eye. Squinting, he leaned closer to get a better look. Under the vehicle's chassis, he saw it, a small, blinking device attached to the frame. Ethan's blood ran cold as the realization dawned on him. This wasn't just a random piece of machinery. It was deliberate, placed with purpose. His heart began to race, and his grip on Max's collar tightened instinctively. Max had sensed it before Ethan ever could. The loyal dog had just stopped him from walking into what could have been a fatal trap. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the blinking device under his car. His mind raced, trying to process what he was looking at. It was no ordinary piece of equipment. It looked too deliberate, too carefully attached. A chill ran down his spine as a terrifying thought crossed his mind. It could be a bomb. Max stood beside him, still tense, his eyes locked on Ethan as if waiting for his next move. Ethan slowly backed away from the car, pulling Max with him. His hands shook as he fumbled for his phone, dialing 911. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's calm voice greeted him. This is Ethan Carter, he said, his voice wavering. There's something attached to my car. I think it might be an explosive device. The operator immediately instructed him to move a safe distance away and wait for authorities to arrive. Ethan led Max into the house, locking the door behind them. His pulse was racing, and his thoughts were chaotic. Who would want to harm him? Why now? Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air. Ethan watched from his living room window as a bomb squad and police vehicles pulled into his driveway. Whatever this was, it was no accident. Ethan stood inside his house, peering through the window as the bomb squad meticulously assessed the situation. Dressed in heavy protective gear, one of the technicians crouched near the car, shining a flashlight under the chassis where Ethan had spotted the device. The sight of their deliberate movements and precise tools only heightened Ethan's anxiety. Max paced back and forth near the door, his ears perked and his eyes darting toward Ethan with every sharp sound outside. It was as if Max understood the gravity of the situation. Ethan crouched to pet him, trying to calm them both. Good boy, Max, he whispered, his voice shaky. You saved me today. Outside, the bomb technician turned to his team and gestured toward the car. Ethan couldn't hear their words, but the body language was unmistakable. This was serious. A police officer approached the house and knocked on the door. Ethan opened it, his nerves fraying. Mr. Carter, the officer began, we've confirmed that the device under your car is an explosive. It appears to be triggered by ignition. If you had started the car... He trailed off, but Ethan understood the implication. His stomach dropped. An explosive? Ethan echoed, the words feeling foreign and unreal. Yes, sir, the officer confirmed grimly. We're working on disarming it now. You're fortunate your dog alerted you. If you hadn't noticed it... Ethan glanced at Max, who had finally stopped pacing and sat by his side, his posture still alert. The officer's tone softened as he added, It's rare, but animals can sense danger better than we can. Your dog might have saved your life. Ethan nodded slowly, the reality of the situation sinking in. Max wasn't just loyal, he was a hero. Ethan stood frozen, the officer's words echoing in his mind. Your dog might have saved your life. He glanced down at Max, who sat steadfastly by his side, his eyes never leaving the car. The magnitude of what had almost happened was overwhelming. If not for Max, Ethan might have been another headline. Millionaire dies in mysterious car explosion. Outside, the bomb squad worked with precision, using robotic tools to safely detach the device. The sound of mechanical whirring and muffled voices filtered into the house. Ethan's stomach churned as he watched the team place the small device into a reinforced container. It was no larger than a loaf of bread, but its destructive potential was immeasurable. Mr. Carter, another officer said, approaching the front door. The explosive has been safely removed. It's being transported for analysis. Ethan's voice was barely steady as he asked, Do you have any idea who could have done this? The officer shook his head. Not yet, but we'll be investigating thoroughly. Whoever planted this device had access to your property, which narrows things down. Ethan felt a cold wave of realization. Access to his property? The implication was chilling. Someone he knew, someone he trusted, might have tried to kill him. He sank into a nearby chair, his mind reeling. As the officers wrapped up their work outside, one of the bomb technicians approached. Mr. Carter, he said, his voice firm but kind, you're lucky to be alive. That device was sophisticated, professional grade. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Ethan swallowed hard, his gaze shifting back to Max. The dog hadn't moved, his quiet presence both comforting and haunting. Ethan reached out to stroke his fur, whispering, You saved me, Max. I owe you everything. As the police and bomb squad cleared the scene, Ethan sat in stunned silence, his hand resting on Max's head. The dog finally relaxed, sensing the immediate danger had passed, but his watchful eyes stayed locked on Ethan, as if reassuring him that he was safe. Ethan's thoughts raced, trying to piece together who could have orchestrated such a deadly plan. A knock at the door startled him. A detective stepped in, holding a notepad. Mr. Carter, we've secured the device and will begin investigating who might have had the means and motive to target you. Ethan nodded, though his mind felt foggy. Do you think this was personal? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The detective hesitated before replying. Given the sophistication of the device, it seems likely. We'll start by looking into anyone with recent access to your property, staff, business associates, or even acquaintances. The words sent a chill through Ethan. Someone within his circle could have betrayed him, plotting his demise with precision and intent. It wasn't just the danger of the bomb that shook him, it was the thought of misplaced trust. As the detective left, Ethan turned to Max. You knew, he murmured. You saw what I couldn't. Max nudged his hand gently, a silent acknowledgement of his role in saving Ethan's life. Ethan spent the rest of the day in a haze, replaying the morning's events over and over in his mind. The sight of the blinking device, the sound of the bomb squad's tools, and Max's frantic actions all looped endlessly in his thoughts. It wasn't just the close call that haunted him, it was the realization that someone had orchestrated it. Someone wanted him dead. He sat at his desk, staring blankly at his computer screen. His assistant had cleared his schedule for the day, but that offered little comfort. Instead, Ethan began mentally compiling a list of people who had been in his inner circle recently: his business partners, his household staff, and even the friends he occasionally entertained at his mansion. Any one of them could be behind this. His phone buzzed, jolting him back to reality. It was a text from the detective who had visited earlier. We've started reviewing surveillance footage from your property. Expect updates soon. Ethan leaned back in his chair, letting out a frustrated sigh. He had always prided himself on his instincts, his ability to read people and anticipate threats. But this time, he'd been blindsided. Whoever did this knew him well. His routine, his habits, even his car. Max's low bark broke the silence. The German Shepherd had been lying by Ethan's feet, his watchful eyes darting toward the door at every sound. Ethan reached down to ruffle Max's ears. You're the only one I can trust, Max, he said softly. As the hours passed, Ethan's unease deepened. The detective's words echoed in his mind. This seems personal. Someone close to him had betrayed him, and the thought was almost as terrifying as the bomb itself. He knew he had to find out who and why before it was too late. The detective's text offered little solace. Ethan's mind was a whirlwind of questions and suspicions. Who would hate him enough to want him dead? He tried to recall any recent disputes or interactions that might offer a clue. As he sifted through his memories, one name surfaced repeatedly: Richard. Richard Sterling was one of Ethan's closest business partners. They had worked together on several major deals, and while their partnership had been fruitful, it wasn't without tension. Their most recent venture had sparked a heated argument over profit sharing. Ethan had insisted on a fair split for everyone involved, but Richard had argued for a larger share, claiming he'd contributed more than anyone else. The last time they spoke, Richard had stormed out of Ethan's office, muttering something about getting what he deserved. At the time, Ethan had dismissed it as frustration, but now it felt like a red flag. Could Richard really be capable of something this extreme? Ethan's phone buzzed again. It was an email from his security team, forwarding an initial review of the surveillance footage. He opened it quickly, scanning the images. One frame made his stomach drop, a blurry figure near his car in the early hours of the morning. The person wore a hoodie, their face obscured, but something about the posture and gait seemed familiar. Ethan leaned back, his breath shallow. Could it really be Richard? The timing, the argument, and now the suspicious footage all pointed to him. Ethan felt a mix of disbelief and anger. If Richard was involved, it wasn't just an attack on his life, it was a betrayal of their partnership, their years of shared success. Ethan stood up, pacing the room. He couldn't confront Richard directly, not yet, but he knew he was closer to uncovering the truth. Ethan couldn't shake the sinking feeling that Richard might be involved. The blurred surveillance image nagged at him, but it wasn't enough to confront him outright. He needed more proof. Deciding to take matters into his own hands, Ethan called the detective to discuss his suspicions. I've been thinking, Ethan began cautiously. There's someone I know, Someone I've had conflicts with recently. His name is Richard Sterling, a business partner. We had a disagreement over money not long ago, and he might have had access to my property. The detective listened carefully. If you suspect him, we'll look into it. But for now, it's best to avoid directly accusing anyone without concrete evidence. That could complicate the investigation. Ethan nodded, though his frustration grew. He hated feeling powerless, but he understood the importance of treading carefully. After hanging up, he sat at his desk and stared at his phone. Every instinct screamed for him to confront Richard, but he knew he needed a smarter approach. Later that evening, Ethan decided to test the waters. He called Richard under the guise of discussing a new project, hoping to gauge his reaction. The phone rang several times before Richard answered, his voice casual but slightly strained. "Ethan, what's up?" Richard said, sounding distracted. Ethan forced a friendly tone. "Hey, Richard, I was thinking about that expansion idea we talked about last month. Figured we could revisit it." Richard chuckled nervously. "Yeah, sure. Maybe later this week. Things are kind of hectic right now." Ethan noted the hesitation in his voice. "Of course," he replied smoothly. "By the way, have you been around the office lately? I noticed some unusual activity near my property." There was a brief pause, just long enough to catch Ethan's attention. "No, haven't been by," Richard said quickly. "Is something wrong?" Ethan smiled faintly, though his suspicion deepened. "Nothing major. Just thought I'd ask." As they ended the call, Ethan leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Richard's evasiveness and nervous tone felt like confirmation. He was hiding something. The next morning, Ethan shared his concerns with the detective, providing details of their conversation. The detective promised to dig deeper into Richard's background and recent activities. Ethan, meanwhile, began preparing for a confrontation he knew was inevitable. If Richard was behind the attempt on his life, Ethan would ensure he faced justice. The detective's follow-up call later that evening confirmed Ethan's worst fears. "We've uncovered something," the detective said. "Your partner, Richard Sterling, made a series of purchases last month, materials consistent with constructing the kind of device we found on your car. He also made multiple visits to a hardware store near your property, according to receipts." Ethan's heart sank. It was no longer a question of suspicion, it was proof. Richard had betrayed him in the most heinous way imaginable. The detective continued, "We'll bring him in for questioning, but it's important you remain cautious. Someone willing to plant a bomb won't hesitate to escalate." Ethan clenched his jaw, anger bubbling beneath the surface. The betrayal felt personal, a stab from someone he had once trusted with his business and his vision for the future. Max sat beside him, his steady gaze offering a strange sense of calm amidst the chaos. "I trusted him," Ethan muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Max nudged his hand, grounding him once again. "You knew, didn't you?" he whispered to the dog. Max didn't respond, of course, but his unwavering presence spoke volumes. As the police prepared to arrest Richard, Ethan braced himself for the fallout. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. The days following Richard's arrest were a whirlwind of emotions for Ethan. Relief that the immediate threat was gone mixed with a deep sense of betrayal. Richard had been more than a business partner. He was someone Ethan had worked alongside for years, someone he had trusted implicitly. That trust, now shattered, left Ethan questioning more than just his judgment. It made him reevaluate his entire way of life. For years, Ethan had built his empire on sharp instincts and an unrelenting work ethic. He was always in control, always one step ahead. Or so he thought. The near-death experience forced him to confront a harsh reality. Despite all his success, he had neglected the relationships that truly mattered. He had surrounded himself with people motivated by ambition and self-interest, leaving little room for genuine connections. Max had been the exception. As Ethan sat on the floor of his living room, tossing a ball for Max to retrieve, he realized how much the dog had been his anchor. Max didn't care about Ethan's wealth or status. He only cared about Ethan as a person. In the moments of quiet companionship, Max had provided a kind of unconditional loyalty and love that no business deal could ever replicate. Ethan ran a hand through Max's fur, his voice soft. "You're the only one who's never let me down," he said. Max wagged his tail, his eyes steady and knowing. For the first time in years, Ethan felt compelled to step back from the relentless grind. He made a decision then and there. His priorities had to change. Max's actions had saved his life, but they had also given him clarity. It was time to focus on what truly mattered: loyalty, trust, and the bonds that made life worth living. Sitting on his porch with Max resting at his feet, Ethan allowed his thoughts to drift back to the day he first met the dog who would later save his life. 6 years ago, Ethan had visited a local shelter on a whim. It wasn't something he typically did. His busy schedule rarely allowed for spontaneity. But a colleague had mentioned the shelter needed donations, and Ethan thought it would be good publicity. The shelter was filled with a cacophony of barks and whines, a stark contrast to the serene ambiance of his usual surroundings. As Ethan walked through the rows of kennels, he noticed a German shepherd sitting quietly at the back of one enclosure. Unlike the other dogs, this one didn't jump or bark. He simply watched Ethan with calm, soulful eyes. The shelter worker explained that the dog, Max, had been brought in after a car accident. His previous owners had abandoned him, deeming his injuries too costly to treat. Ethan felt an unexpected pang of empathy. Here was a creature who had been discarded, yet he exuded a quiet strength. Without hesitation, Ethan adopted Max that day. He arranged for the best medical care and ensured the dog recovered fully. In the months that followed, Max became more than just a pet. He became Ethan's steadfast companion. Through late nights working, failed relationships, and moments of triumph, Max was always there, offering an unwavering presence. Now, as Ethan looked at Max lying peacefully beside him, he realized just how much that decision had shaped his life. Adopting Max wasn't just an act of charity, it was the start of a bond that had given him purpose and ultimately saved his life. "You chose me back then," Ethan murmured, scratching Max behind the ears, "and I'll never forget it." Ethan sat at his desk, scrolling through the hundreds of messages pouring in from his latest blog post. What had started as a simple reflection on Max's heroic act had quickly gone viral, garnering attention far beyond his usual circle. The post, titled, "The Day My Dog Saved My Life," recounted the morning Max had stopped him from entering the car, the discovery of the bomb, and the betrayal that followed. But it wasn't just the suspense of the story that captivated readers. It was the emotional depth. Ethan had written candidly about how Max's loyalty had forced him to confront the hollowness of his achievements. "For years, I measured success in dollars and deals," he wrote. "But in the moment Max saved me, I realized true success lies in the bonds we build and the loyalty we give and receive." The responses were overwhelming. People shared stories of their own pets: a cat that had sensed a gas leak, a dog that had alerted its owner to a medical emergency, or simply the everyday comfort animals brought to their lives. Ethan was moved by the sheer volume of gratitude and emotion his story had unleashed. One comment caught his eye: "You don't just have a dog, you have a guardian angel. Thank you for reminding us all to cherish the ones who protect us." The words struck a chord with Ethan. Max wasn't just a loyal companion. He had been a lifeline, not just on the day of the bombing, but throughout Ethan's entire journey. Inspired by the outpouring of support, Ethan decided to take his newfound clarity a step further. He reached out to a local shelter, the same one where he had adopted Max, and offered to fund an expansion project. The shelter's director was overwhelmed. "This will save so many animals," she said tearfully over the phone. Ethan felt a surge of fulfillment he hadn't experienced in years. He also announced a series of initiatives through his company: paid volunteer days for employees at animal shelters, fundraising campaigns for rescue organizations, and sponsorship of senior pet adoption programs. The moves were met with widespread acclaim, both within his company and the broader community. Ethan realized that sharing Max's story wasn't just about honoring his dog, it was about creating a ripple effect of compassion. Max had taught him a profound lesson, one he was determined to pass on to others. Life's greatest treasures are the relationships that enrich it, not the wealth that measures it. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. His mornings, once a flurry of rushed calls and hurried schedules, now started with quiet walks with Max. Together, they strolled through the neighborhood, Max's tail wagging in contentment as Ethan reflected on how much his life had changed. One evening, Ethan sat on the floor of his living room, tossing a toy for Max to catch. His laptop sat open nearby, displaying plans for the shelter expansion he was funding. It was a simple moment, one he might have overlooked in the past, but now it felt profoundly meaningful. "You've given me more than I can ever repay," Ethan said softly, stroking Max's fur. "Not just my life, but a reason to live it differently." Max looked up at him with those same soulful eyes Ethan had seen the day they met at the shelter. It was as if Max understood every word. As Ethan closed his laptop and leaned back, Max rested his head on Ethan's lap. In the stillness, Ethan realized something. For all his wealth and success, these moments, quiet, genuine, and full of love, were the real riches of life, and Max had been the one to teach him that. Several months later, Ethan found himself standing at the entrance of the very shelter where he had first met Max. The air buzzed with excitement as volunteers and guests gathered for the grand opening of the shelter's new wing, funded entirely by Ethan's donation. Bright banners fluttered in the breeze, reading, "Every paw deserves a second chance." Max trotted beside him, wearing a special collar that read "Hero" in bold letters. People greeted them warmly, many eager to meet the dog whose story had inspired so much generosity. Ethan couldn't help but smile as children ran up to pet Max, who, as usual, responded with calm, patient grace. Taking the stage, Ethan addressed the crowd. "6 years ago, I came to this shelter expecting to make a small donation. What I didn't expect was to leave with a lifelong companion who would not only save my life, but teach me what truly matters. Max reminded me that loyalty, love, and second chances are the greatest gifts we can give and receive." The crowd erupted into applause. Ethan continued, "This expansion isn't just about space. It's about hope for the animals here and the people they will one day save in return. I hope each of you finds your Max just as I did." As the ribbon was cut, Ethan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. People began touring the new wing, meeting the animals and sharing stories of their own pets. Max was the center of attention, but he seemed unfazed, staying close to Ethan's side. That evening, as the event wound down, Ethan sat on a bench outside the shelter, watching Max interact with the last few guests. "We've come full circle," he thought, feeling an immense gratitude not just for Max, but for the path their bond had set him on. As the event wrapped up, an older man approached Ethan, his face warm with a mix of familiarity and gratitude. "Mr. Carter," the man began, extending a hand, "I'm James, the former director of this shelter. I ran it when you adopted Max." Ethan shook his hand, intrigued. "It's an honor to meet you, James. Max has changed my life in ways I can't even begin to describe." James chuckled softly, looking down at Max, who sat obediently by Ethan's side. "I remember Max's story well. When he was brought here, he'd been through a terrible accident and abandoned by his previous owner. He was scared and injured, but there was something about him. Even then, he had a resilience and calm that stood out." Ethan nodded, recalling the day he met Max and how the dog had seemed to choose him as much as he had chosen Max. "I had no idea he'd been through so much," Ethan admitted, running a hand over Max's head. "But I knew, the moment I saw him, that he was special." James smiled. "He's not just special, he's extraordinary. Stories like his remind us why we do this work. Max didn't just survive, he thrived. And now he's saving lives, just like he saved yours." The two men sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, watching as volunteers cleaned up the event. Ethan turned to James. "You know, I thought I was saving Max when I brought him home, but the truth is, he's the one who saved me." James placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "That's the beauty of it, isn't it? You saved each other." Ethan looked down at Max, his heart full. "Yes," he said softly, "and I'll spend the rest of my life honoring that." As Ethan and Max walked back to their car, the evening air was filled with the quiet hum of volunteers packing up and the soft rustling of the shelter's animals settling in for the night. Ethan paused, looking back at the brightly lit shelter. The newly expanded wing stood as a testament to what Max had taught him: loyalty, resilience, and the value of second chances. For so long, Ethan had measured success by numbers, profits, assets, and achievements. But Max had shown him a different kind of wealth. The connection they shared, built on trust and unconditional love, was something money could never buy. Ethan thought about how close he had come to losing everything that morning when Max stopped him from getting into the car. It wasn't just his life that Max saved, it was his perspective, his priorities. As they reached the car, Ethan crouched down to Max's level, his voice low but filled with emotion. "You've given me more than I'll ever deserve, Max," he said, ruffling the dog's ears. Max wagged his tail, his eyes warm and steady. Ethan stood and glanced back at the shelter one last time. He knew their journey wasn't over. Max had saved him, and now it was his turn to continue the legacy of love and loyalty Max had taught him. That night, Ethan and Max returned home, the warmth of the day's events still lingering in Ethan's heart. As he sat on the living room floor, Max curled up beside him, his tail gently thumping against the rug. The house, once a symbol of success and solitude, now felt alive with purpose. Ethan glanced at the framed photo on the mantel, a picture of him and Max from years ago, taken not long after he'd brought Max home from the shelter. In the photo, Max's eyes held the same steadfast loyalty they did now, a reminder of the bond they had forged over time. Before heading to bed, Ethan took Max out to the backyard. The moonlit sky cast a soft glow over the trees, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. Max sniffed the air, his ears perking up at distant sounds. Ethan watched him, marveling at how much this dog had changed his life. As they walked back inside, Ethan spoke softly. "You're not just my dog, Max. You're my family, my protector, and my greatest teacher." That night, as Ethan drifted off to sleep, Max lay on the floor beside his bed, his presence a quiet assurance. In his dreams, Ethan saw the shelter, filled with animals finding their second chance, their Max, just as he had. The story of Ethan and Max reminds us of the profound impact loyalty, love, and second chances can have on our lives. Max wasn't just a dog. He was a protector, a teacher, and a symbol of unconditional devotion. Through their bond, Ethan learned that life's true wealth lies in relationships, not material success. Max's actions saved Ethan, not just physically, but emotionally, steering him toward a life of purpose and compassion. This tale serves as a heartfelt reminder that sometimes the ones we rescue end up rescuing us, teaching us to cherish the bonds that truly matter. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of loyalty, love, and the incredible bonds between humans and animals. Join us as we share stories that remind us of what truly matters in life. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment.